Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for Boris Effects, and I'm back again with another tutorial. And in this lesson, we're talking about what's new in Continuum 2020.5 for Avid Media Composer. All right, so as you can see, we are in Avid Media Composer. And before we get rolling, I want to do a few little housekeeping things to get us rolling. First, let's talk about the version of Media Composer that I'm running, which is actually irrelevant. As long as your version of Media Composer supports Continuum 2020.5, everything I'm going to show you in this lesson is going to work exactly the same. Doesn't matter the version of Media Composer, doesn't matter if you're on Mac or Windows. So keep that in mind. Now, second, let's talk about Continuum 2020, because if you purchase Continuum 2020 or you subscribe to Continuum, doesn't matter which version, you are eligible to update to this version absolutely free. So keep that in mind. If you purchase 2020 or you subscribe, when you're done watching this video, head on over to the Boris Effects website, download this update right away. And last but certainly not least, I want to give a big shout out to our friends at artgrid.io for providing us with the footage for this tutorial. You can check out these clips plus thousands of others at artgrid.io. Now, let's start out by talking about transitions. And for me, transitions has been one of the categories that has gotten the most love over the last few years. And, if you'd have asked me 4 or 5 years ago whether I use third-party transitions in my projects, I would have told you no. You asked me that today, and I got to tell you, I use at least 1 or 2 in every project that I work on. Now, one thing that I love about a lot of these transitions is they're what I like to call unnoticeable. Now, you might be thinking, well, Kev, that doesn't sound like a good thing, but it actually is, because the whole point of a transition is not to pull you out of what you're watching. It's to keep you engrossed in it. And we got 2 new ones here. One is the crash zoom dissolve, and one is the spin blur dissolve. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give this a little bit of a play here. You'll see here come my crash zoom dissolves. Very nice. And these are very smooth, very organic transitions. And you see, they work great with this dance footage. They'd work great with sports footage, even corporate videos, because they don't pull you out. Very smooth transition. I have these actually happening in about 12 frames. So if you were to even slow this down, double that, and put it at a second long, it would give you an even smoother transition. Now, one thing that I also want to point out about transitions inside of Continuum is that they're not one-trick ponies. All right, I'm just going to step into effects mode on one of these transitions. You'll see not only is there an absolute ton of parameters that you can get in and adjust, but if we head up to the FX browser, you'll see, look at this. One transition has, what's that, 5, that's 25, that's about 27 or 28 different presets for you to choose from for you to get rolling with this transition effect. And the great thing is that you could conceivably use this one transition effect in a timeline, use it 27 different ways, and people will think it's different transitions that you used every time, not the same one. All right, so I'm just going to cancel out of this. Let me just close the effect editor for just 1 second, and I want to move on now, and I want to talk about Title Studio. So I'm just going to double click on this timeline here, and before I start talking about the actual, physical feature updates, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Title Studio under the hood. Now, since I just talked about the FX browser, let's talk about this first. So, along with the FX browser, Title Studio now supports 4K or high DPI displays. So if you have a 4K or a high DPI display, you'll be able to look at these 2 tools in all of their 4K high DPI glory. So keep that in mind. Now, another feature that has been added, one that is very welcome, I'm actually just going to switch over to a different sequence here. You'll see that I have a clownfish title, is that if I step into effects mode, you'll notice that inside of the Title Studio effect editor window, that I have this little drop down here called Composite. I'm just going to drop that down. We now have access to Composite or transfer modes right here from within the effect interface itself. So you can now get in and work with your favorite transfer modes right here without having to add any additional effects or parameters right from within the effect editor. Okay. Now, another sort of, I say these are sort of under the hood features. It's not really, but more presets. You can never go wrong with more presets, which if we're talking about presets is going to take us back to the FX browser. So let me just step back into effects mode here. Let's come into the FX browser. You'll see not only do we have tons of great presets to work with in here, but we have a new category as well. If I head on up to 3D models, you'll now see that we have some 3D models for us to call up and work with. Now, the one that I want to draw your attention to that is very cool, and if you watched Boris Effects' virtual NAB week, you would have seen this. This is one that was created, I believe all of these were created by John Dickinson, but one that is very cool that I can easily see you using on a pretty regular basis is the cyclorama wall. Okay, I'm just going to cancel out of this here, and you'll see that what I have done here is I've basically created this very cool reveal animation with just some very basic text that says Boris Effects. But what you can do is you can customize your own text here. So if I was to come back into, let's call it the effects palette here, I'm just going to type in Title Studio. We'll take Title Studio, I'll drag it and drop it right down here onto Video Layer 2. I'm just going to step into effects mode, head into the FX browser. Now what we could do is we could simply select the psych preset. We could get in, type in the text that we want to have it say, simply hit insert text, and we would be all set to go. But where's the fun in that? Or what we could do is we could choose the empty psych wall. And what this gives us the ability to do is to apply it. We could then, once it's applied, we're just going to view Video Layer 2, and I'm going to navigate up and I'm going to launch the Title Studio UI. Now, once I have the UI up, what I'm then going to do is I'm simply going to head right over here. I'm going to add some extruded text for us to work with. I don't know, let's call this, why don't I just use my name again, Kevin. I'm not big on that font overall. I could just come down here. We'll choose Avenir. Maybe we'll choose Avenir Next Bold. Very nice. I'm just going to adjust its tracking, and then what we can do is simply come down, change the color to whatever color we want the color to be. In this case, I think I'm going to go with like that yellow color that I had chosen before. Say OK, and of course I could change the psych wall to whatever color I want that to be. In this case, why don't we sort of go with a purple color? And you can see that we can now get in and add 3D titles to this element super quick and super simple. Now, the last new feature inside of Title Studio that I want to talk about is the cast shadow parameter. Now, I've created a very basic title here called, as you can see, Clownfish. I've also given it a bit of a texture so that it looks like a clownfish. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch the Title Studio UI. Now for this example, what I've done is just turn the background off because I want to show you how this works with nothing impeding in the background. So there's a very, very clear shadow that's going to appear. Now, what's important to keep in mind about the cast shadow, I'm going to call it an effect for right now, is that it's actually been inside of BCC since the 2020 update. And it's a great shadow for Media Composer editors to use because we don't have the ability to work in a real 3D environment. So what cast shadow gives us the ability to do is to fake it. Fake it until we make it, if you want to call it that. And we can add a fake 3D shadow that will give our element depth without having to worry about 3D. Let's just put it that way. However, once we get in and start working with Title Studio, as you've seen up till this point, we are actually working in a true 3D environment. So what we actually want to do is we want to utilize that 3D technology and that 3D capability to produce a real cast shadow. So what I'm going to do is with my clownfish text selected, I'm going to navigate up to shaders. And this is not a shader that we're going to be using. It's actually an image processor. Now what's important to keep in mind about an image processor is what these basically are is it's the ability to add certain effects from inside of Continuum into Title Studio. You'll see that we've got ones like light rays, glows, but the one that we're talking about right now is cast shadow. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to, with clownfish selected, select cast shadow. And you're going to notice that immediately we now have a shadow that's being cast behind our text. Now, of course, that does beg the question, why is the light being cast behind the text? What I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate over to the scene itself and I'm going to select it. And as soon as I do, you're now going to notice this little XYZ widget that appears on the screen. What this actually is, this is my light. I'm just going to set the quality down a little bit so that when I actually show this to you, it's going to give you an almost real-time update. What I can now do is to simply grab this widget, and as I start to drag it over this way, you'll see that this light is actually having a direct impact on the text and the shadow that's being cast. So keep in mind, this light is in front of the text. It's being shone down right onto our clownfish text, and then the shadow is being cast onto a fake floor that you see behind it. Okay? Now keep in mind, we could put a floor here so that it actually looks like it's being cast onto the floor. What we also have the ability to do is to navigate over here to our scene, simply choose the shader, and then get in and adjust things like the softness of the shadow. We could also get in and adjust its length, even adjust the color, and even the opacity mode of the shadow itself. So what we've now just done is added an additional layer of realism. And you can see that this actually looks like it's sitting on a floor plane, with real true depth to it because we're working in a 3D application. So this is a great, great new feature that again just adds another additional layer of realism to our work inside of Title Studio. All right, so let's move on now and let's talk about particle illusion. Now, one thing that I love about particle illusion for me is that every time I use it, it is a learning tool. And what I mean by this is that you can learn so much about it by either just using a preset or just playing around with the absolute particles in their most basic form. And let me show you what I mean by this. I'm going to switch over to my particle illusion timeline. And as you can see, I've created quite a complex particle stream here. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to step into particle illusion here. And once I step in, you'll see pretty complicated. It's a straight line of particles. Now, before we get too far, I do want to mention that particle illusion does have one little, and I'm not going to call it necessarily an under the hood new feature, but you now have the ability to get in and to select favorites. You'll notice that we have a little star up here and we can add the current emitter to a favorites list. So as we go through, if I was to select, this explosion as an example, if I like it, I can simply navigate up to my favorite, add it to my favorites list, and then I can go through and find my favorites super quick and super simple. But the big new feature inside of particle illusion is the addition of two new forces for us to work with. Now, if you're unfamiliar with forces and how they work, you're going to get a little bit of a lesson right now. Now, I created this because I wanted just to have a stream of particles that started in one place and just shot off in one direction, kind of like we're in space, shooting off into the unknown. And up until this point, the force that we've had to work with is very cool. And I'm just going to come back here and we're just going to add it. All right. And I'm going to add it right about here. So what's going to happen is that as the particles hit that force, you're going to notice that they slightly change direction. Now, it's always easier for me to actually get in and adjust the angle. So you can sort of get an idea of really what's happening here. Let's just play this. The particles will hit that force kind of like a fan and then sort of move off in another direction. Now, this is all fine and good, and one thing that people think or they assume with particle illusion is that you're working with 2D flat particles, but I want to show you something here. I'm just going to rotate this all the way around because I want these particles to come back in the direction, more or less the direction that I'm sending them. And I want you to take a look at what's now happening. I'm just going to move this up a little bit here. When I come back and I hit play on these particles, take a look at this. Look at the way that they curve and come back in real and true 3D space. So we've now just created a very cool force that's pushing against these particles. So let's take this concept one step further. You'll see that right up here I have force type, and the force type is set to be area. What this basically is kind of like is we've slapped down this rectangular area. Particles hit it, that rectangular area determines what force is pushed against them. Okay? But what we're going to do is I'm actually going to change this to be a grid. Now, at its default, grid is exactly the same as area. There's no difference. You can see the shape hasn't changed, but what's happened is that it's actually been broken down into all of these different smaller groups. Now, you'll also notice that if I come back and hit play, there's absolutely no change in what the particles do. Exactly the same thing. However, take a look at what happens if I adjust the strength variation. The strength is set to 100, but watch what happens if I adjust it and I make that a variable number instead of a constant number. Let's put it at a value of like 300. As soon as I do that and I say enter, you'll notice immediately that something has happened. Take a look at what's happening now. As soon as it hits that force, the particles are no longer, I'll say, uniform anymore, because the strength that's being pushed against them is varying based on all those smaller rectangles, which is very, very cool. What we can also do is now get in and adjust the direction of those same individual little rectangles inside the grid. Let's put it at something not too crazy, about 100. And you see right away the difference that we now have with these particles. They're still doing roughly what they were doing before, but there's less uniformity to them because the direction they're going has been all thrown off by the force. Now, let me show you the last one that's very cool. I'm just going to stop right there, and I'm going to switch this now. We're going to move this out of the way. And I'm going to switch this from grid to point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the point force, because what I now want to do is I want to take these particles, and at a certain position I want to send them straight up north. So it's almost like what I want to do is to create kind of like a bumper in pinball, so that when the particles hit this bumper, they're sent off in a different direction. And what I'm going to do is just adjust the strength here. Let's just put it up, I don't know, we'll just punch in an absolute value of like 300, okay? And we'll adjust the radius as well. We'll put that, I don't know, let's put it at about the same, okay? You'll notice that as I make the adjustments here, the actual on-screen widget adjusts, but keep in mind that I can actually adjust the widget myself. And what makes this very interesting is the fact that strength is not just a positive number, okay? I'm just going to make sure I'm not too sensitive there, because you'll notice that as I drag through, it's not quite doing what I want it to do. I'm going to take the strength value and I'm going to put it at a value of 300. And now take a look at what's going to happen when I put these particles in here. I'm going to put them a little bit closer down here, kind of like this. And let's just adjust the force so we can send them directly north, okay? So now when I hit play, they're going to hit that. Now they don't hit it hard, but take a look at that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this exact same force and I'm going to duplicate it. So let's duplicate it. Now you'll see if I duplicate it and leave it where it is, it sends it in a complete curve almost back the other direction. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to take the other one that we created and I'm going to put it right about, let's just see how high we can get this here. Okay. And you see that they start curving back now, and we can get in now and adjust how much we want them to curve back by placing this force wherever we want it to go. So now you'll see that we can almost send it. It's almost like a projector. We can almost send the particles through whatever direction we want by either attracting them to the point force or repelling them away from it. So it's a very, very cool and very welcome update to add additional realism to our particles. And what I love about this is that, you know, if I was to show this to you with an element like fire, it would be very hard to see. All this is a bunch of little circles, but you get a very, very good idea. And this is something I encourage you to do, is to work with basic particles to get a good understanding of how particle illusion works, because then you're going to take those concepts that you've learned and then apply it to the more complex looking particles. A perfect one for the grid one is for smoke. Smoke rises, and as the higher it gets, it starts to change, it starts to waver a little bit. That's where you can use the grid with the strength variance and the direction variance to give it a very realistic look. Okay, so let's just stop what we're doing here, and I'm just going to close out of particle illusion. I'm not going to save, and let's move on. Let's talk about the last big update inside a Continuum, which is Remover. All right, now I love Remover. And if you take a look in here, I've actually removed something, and it's not readily apparent what I've removed because it was a very subtle remove that I did. So I'm going to show you now what it was, and I'm just going to step into the effect here. And if you take a look, I just removed this little sort of, the fold in the pillow. And the reason that I chose that was because I could have gone in and done something simple, like removed this outlet on the wall. But what I wanted to do instead was to make this a little bit more complicated, because this is a little bit of a complicated track, and it's also a little bit of an odd shape. So this right here is the core of the feature update to Remover. Now, one thing that's important to keep in mind with Remover, if I come up here, we're just going to type in Remover. Make sure I spelled that correctly, which I did. There's BCC Remover. You'll notice that it is not a real-time effect. Okay? If I take Remover, I drag it and drop it down onto my footage, you'll notice right away that when I step into the effect, we now have these widgets that we can work with, which is fantastic. Okay? I love these widgets because they're a very visual way to see exactly what's going on. Let me just undo that here. I don't want to be too sensitive. Perfect. You can see that if I place this over our guy's hand or his arm, basically this area here is being replaced by whatever is in this circle right here. And of course, we can get in and adjust the radius as well as adjusting the feather if we wanted to. But what about a situation where you have an odd shaped shape that you want to get in and remove? Or in this case, this shot is a bumpy shot. And it's not exactly going to be the easiest thing to do frame by frame, which is definitely not how I want to use this effect. Well, this is where the new Mocha integration into Remover is going to come in and help us. Okay? Now, before I show that to you, let me just grab these 2 points here, because you'll notice that as I was grabbing the destination, the source was moving along with it. One of the other feature updates inside of Remover is that if I navigate over to the clone dropdown, you'll notice that the offset mode is set to relative offset for the clone spot. So as I move the destination, the source moves with it. Now I can move the source to wherever I want, but whenever I move the destination, it will move with it. Or what I could do is I could set that to absolute, and I can move them independently of each other. Okay? But we're not really going to care about this right now because this is all fine and cool. But what we want to do is we want to get in and work with Mocha. So I'm just going to reset this effect to its factory defaults, and I'm going to twirl up clone, and I'm going to navigate down to motion tracker / Mocha. All right. Now there's a couple ways that we can do this. Now I'm not going to do the clone spot. I'm going to do a clone shape because a spot is a circle. So let's use clone shape, and let's step into the pixel chooser / Mocha. I'm going to select the Mocha mask / track. And what we're going to do is, again, we're going to work with this area over here in the corner. Okay. I'm just going to zoom right in, and I'm just going to use, we can use a B-spline, sure, why not? And I'm just going to be not super precise, because obviously you have way more time than I do. I'm just going to come right up here, and we're going to put that right about there. I think is pretty good. And I'll just leave everything the way that it is. We'll track translation, scale, rotation. I'll leave the minimum percentage of pixels used at 90%. That value will obviously vary based on the footage you are working with, but my footage is fairly simple and straightforward. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to track forwards. And you'll notice that my track is pretty darn locked on. Then what I'm going to do is once it's done, we're going to head back and we're going to track backwards. Now my Mocha window is slightly off there. That's fine. So you can see we're already done. Boom. So what we're now going to do is simply close out of Mocha, and I'm going to save what we've just done. Now you're going to notice here that some weirdness has happened. Now the reason that the weirdness has happened is that you're going to see that we have now this little crosshairs that's on the screen that's going to represent what we are actually going to be replacing this area with. Now, first thing I got to do here is I'm just going to zoom in and move over a little bit here. You'll notice it's a very hard matte. So let's adjust that. What we're going to do is come down to our pixel chooser mask. I'm just going to feather it. Now, obviously, we don't want to feather it too much. I'm just going to give it a feather value of maybe, 5. Even that's, maybe that's not too bad. Maybe we'll go with like 3. Okay. Once we have this set to go, what we're then going to do is I'm now going to come in and we're going to adjust what we're actually going to be replacing that with. Now for me, I normally like to set the relative offset exactly back to being 0, so no change has been made. Now where we get in and adjust that is in the clone section. You'll see offsets right here. I'm just going to set the X and Y values to 0. So this is going to look exactly the way that we had it before, because all I want to do is replace it with just a little bit over here. So what I want to do is just move the Y value down, and I want to move it over a little bit. kind of like that. Now you'll see again, it's not exactly correctly dead on. It's pretty darn close though. So what I could do now is get in and adjust the feather around what I've done. And what I could also do is come down and adjust the brightness of that area as well to really get it to sink in and mesh exactly with the chair that's already there. And this way, when I drag through, you almost can't even notice that I've got in and made a change. Now, of course, you could get in and spend minutes, hours, even days getting in and removing things from shots. For example, if you didn't like the shadow on this cushion, you could easily get in and remove it by simply selecting the area here, sliding it over to the left, and getting everything looking exactly the way that you need it to look. And as I wrap things up, don't forget, like I said before, if you purchase Continuum 2020 or you subscribe to it, you can download the 2020.5 update right now. And for more great training, don't forget to check us out on the Boris Effects YouTube channel. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.